Welcome to another episode of The Plunge. And we're recording this a Monday night, just after Baylor just destroys Gonzaga. But let's just rewind a couple of days back into the Final Four, and let's just start there. We can just quickly go through the Houston-Baylor game. Not really too much to see there. You could clearly tell Baylor was just physically the better team against Houston.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things with Houston. They have Giroux, who is a really good defender. And against a lot of teams who had one main offensive threat, I mean, they played Rutgers, who they had a hard time with. And then Syracuse, they locked up on their real only great offensive threat in Boeheim with Giroux. And then the same with Oregon State with Ethan Thompson. And Houston's kind of built around being a team who is able to lock down the best players. But when you're playing Baylor and there are four guys who can score in multiple ways on the floor at all times, it's just going to be a tough matchup. And Baylor blew that one up really early on in the game, just hitting threes. Jared Butler was great. Davian Mitchell's been really good all tournament. So, yeah, that game, I think it was kind of common knowledge coming into the game that it wouldn't go as planned, just because Houston did have quite an easy path to the Final Four, and they hadn't really been tested by a good team yet.
Yeah, and when you look at Baylor's three guards, like, they're all capable of putting the ball on the floor and creating their own shot, and even as we saw tonight. But we'll get back to that later. Let's move on to the next Final Four matchup, UCLA and Gonzaga. That was probably one of the most crazy finishes ever in tournament history, with Jalen Suggs hitting that half-court shot. Just take us through how UCLA kind of hung with them throughout the entire game with Juzang and all those guys. So, yeah, just tell us what happened with UCLA.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before, but in the NCAA tournament, if you have more than one star player, you can usually be competitive in almost every game you play. And you could see that with UCLA because Hawkins is a dominant player, and Tiger Campbell was really good at times as well. And then, of course, Juzang, he did so much for UCLA throughout the tournament, just hitting big shot after big shot. And he was able to get to his spots in the mid-range. He hit a lot of clutch threes in that game as well. And this UCLA team, I wasn't invested in them. I thought they would lose to Michigan State in the play-in game because Michigan State was really a solid team near the end of the year. But UCLA continually, night in and night out, was able to control the pace. They hit big shots. And wow, that game was one of the best games I've ever seen in college basketball, just because you had an out-talented UCLA team, but just they had no give up in them. Like, they were always going to fight to the finish, and Juzang finishing that with 1.7 seconds left. And I mean, Gonzaga was a more talented team, but that was such an exciting game because it was just the fight of UCLA against the skill and the talent of all those pieces on Gonzaga.
Played a really good game. He really tested Drew Timme he had 14 points, 10 rebounds. And I think watching that game, like, he really put himself in the paint there. And it was actually a pretty good foreshadow into today's game. But yeah, I think it was just a tough finish for the Bruins and how they lost that game. But you know, we move on to the final game, national championship game tonight, and I think maybe, I don't know if you saw this, Nate, but I think Gonzaga kind of peaked too early in that Final Four game where, Jalen Suggs hit that game winner. We're going on to the championship game, and then like they start out this game flat tonight, and they were down 9-0 early. They were down 19 pretty early too, and like the commentators were saying they looked tired, but I don't know. They switched to a zone like with 6 minutes left in the first half, and they started the second half with a zone. When clearly their man defense was been good the entire season. So I don't know. Did you see the same from the Zags tonight? Like, physically they just weren't there?
Yeah. Actually, one last thing I wanted to mention before we get on to this game is Johnny Juzang from UCLA is going to be a fantastic NBA player, in my opinion. Just that was kind of the impression I got from this weekend, that was one of the big takeaways. If you're an NBA team, you have to take a second look at this guy just because of his clutch gene. But getting into this Gonzaga and Baylor game, the greatness of Gonzaga was in their parity on offense. It's in the fact that AIE can be their top scorer a lot of nights throughout this season. And you could see early on in this game, just because of the defensive toughness of Baylor, through like all 5 guys are tough on defense. And that really puts you in a bind because there's not a weak point. And when Gonzaga has a weak point to attack, they can almost always expose it because they have so many guys who can make plays out of their starters. And AIE was really good against UCLA. Nembhard had a couple of really good games in the tournament as well. Kispert, I think he has too many flaws to be your number one option on your team. Like, he can't really handle the ball. He's more of a spot up shooter, and he can kind of get to the basket, but he's not the best finisher, and he doesn't really use his size inside. So when you don't have the parity and you don't have that weak point to attack for Gonzaga, you really struggle as a team because your only guy who can consistently beat a tough defensive team is Jalen Suggs. And Jalen Suggs had Davion Mitchell on him the whole game, who's nicknamed Off Night for a reason. And Timmy is a really talented player in the post. He has great footwork. He has great fundamentals, but he just doesn't have the size against a Vital tonight or a Chamchua down low, where he can, like, they were closing in on him multiple times with 2 or 3 guys, and his footwork can get him past 1 consistently, but he doesn't have the size to finish with so much contact in the paint, and that's really what doomed Gonzaga in this game.
Yeah, and I think the problem on their offense was that I think it really was Corey Kispert. Like, you see him being that first screen or setting that high screen in the middle of on the top of the key, and then he can't really roll to the basket because Drew Timme is usually already there, and it's too far for him to go to the corner for an open 3. So I think there's a lot of possessions tonight where Gonzaga clogged the paint too much, and Baylor was already in the paint, like already there, like smothering Timme, and you had guys like Vital. He had I think 8 offensive rebounds too, and I think he had 8 offensive rebounds, 11 in total in the game, and I think I think really Baylor just outworked Gonzaga in the defensive end.
Yeah, some things you can see with Baylor too, like Davion Mitchell. I've been watching more and more of him throughout this tournament, and he attacks really well off the pick and roll. Like, his first dribble, because he's such a good pull-up jump shooter, his first dribble is really powerful off the screen, and he can turn that into a lob quickly, a quick drive, or he can pull up. And it's so effective when you have big guys rolling into the paint, because your lob threat is so evident, and it opens up the floor so much for you, and you have great shooters around you in Butler, and Meyer can be a really good shooter at times too. He played a lot of minutes for them in this tournament, but it's just a case where you have to close every defensive lane if you're Gonzaga, and they do have a lot of guys who aren't really the best defenders, but no one's noticed because they've continually outscored teams all season. Like, you had Kispert being beat down low. Timme is a reasonable defender down low, but he's not athletic enough to block a lot of shots or disrupt alley-oops. And some of their guards, Nembhard, he's a little bit slow for guarding a 2-guard. And I don't know, Gonzaga just didn't have to play a style like this throughout the entire season. And so they didn't have the experience of the adjustments they need to make when there is always a good roller and a guy to kick out to in the corner, because they'd collapse on the drives a lot, and that would leave them really vulnerable. And that's why Baylor was able to kick out and start the game 5 for 5 from 3.
Yeah, and even when Gonzaga did spread the floor a little bit defensively, like there were a lot of times where Baylor ran that high pick and roll and the paint was wide open. And sometimes you weren't able to get the ball into the paint because Gonzaga was kind of having their hands up and all, but when they did, it was an easy dunk or easy layup, right? And so I think, yeah, that kind of really hurt them a lot. But when you look at their team stats, like Gonzaga 14 turnovers, and so that just really is a testament to the Baylor defense and how they their defense is just too elite facing a Gonzaga team who's kind of breezed through the entire NCAA season, going almost undefeated with the perfect season on the line. So I think, yeah, I don't think, Gonzaga never faced this type of adversity before, and during the tournament and the season. I think they just couldn't really match the firepower of Baylor. So I think one question is if Gonzaga was less tired, like say they blew out UCLA and they had the same energy level coming into this game as Baylor, would this game have been different, like the outcome of the game?
Well, you have to give a lot of props to Baylor after this game just because the way they were able to close every lane and they were able to put pressure on both Suggs when he was bringing up the ball, and whenever AI touched the ball, like he couldn't really get anything going towards the hoop. And I do maybe think that this game could have been different if they had blown out UCLA, just because you're really emotionally invested in a game like that, and it takes its toll. And you could probably say around the first 10 minutes of the game, like that's when it affects you, and then you kind of get into the rhythm of playing in another game. And you could see with Gonzaga, like within that first 10 minutes, they were really struggling. They fall down 9-0. And then they go behind 29-10, I think. And it was just a struggle for them all the way through. Just in the way of getting a competent offense together. Timmy, like you said, just outpowered down low by Vital and Chumchua. And Suggs is really the only guy who I think is capable of creating his own shot and being effective against an elite defense, and just the other guys let Gonzaga down tonight. So
Yeah, like once Baylor went up 9-0, they just never looked back, and you couldn't really capitalize on anything if you're Gonzaga against a team whose defense is just physically way bigger than you. And even Drew Timmy, like he couldn't even get his usual looks, and even when he did the next, like when he get like a post up layup or whatever, and he had very few of them, like literally the next offensive possession, Baylor kind of shut him down really quickly. And so, yeah, I think the takeaway from this game is that, yeah, just the toughness of Baylor. They never look back. But anyways, moving on. The buyout market in the NBA. Andre Drummond goes to the Lakers. What are your thoughts on this acquisition by the Lakers? And really just, he is, that defensive presence for the Lakers. But does he really add anything when it comes to the playoffs when you got AD and Harrell on the team already?
yeah, for sure, because the Lakers run last year was built on the fact that they were able to out physical teams, outsize them in the paint. People don't really talk about the job that Dwight Howard did on Nikola Jokic in the postseason, because he was able to get in the head of Jokic and just start playing him really tough, where AD can't, because he can't get into foul trouble because he's such a necessity to how the Lakers run their offense. So when you bring Drummond to the team, yeah, he's not an elite defender. Like he doesn't guard the pick and roll very well. I mean, he's slow. He doesn't move his feet very well. He can move them okay at times, but what he does bring is a lot of rebounding, a lot of putbacks, and just a lot of mass inside. And that was so crucial to the Lakers last year. And that's an aspect they've really been missing this year, because you can see it. Like JaVale, he was really coveted on the trade market when Denver traded for him. And Dwight Howard, he's been a really, really important piece for Philly, especially when Embiid was out this year. And they lost a lot in this offseason. I think it was overshadowed by you had Schroeder joining and you had Harrell and Wesley Matthews and Marc Gasol. But Marc Gasol is not Dwight Howard, and he doesn't really bring anything close to what Dwight Howard brings anymore. And Drummond brings a little bit more of that Dwight Howard skill set to the team. And plus, he's a guy who really would have excelled in the 2000 to 2010 era. And he did have a couple All-Star appearances early on with the Pistons, but I guess we'll see how things move forward. But I think this is a big acquisition for the Lakers, and I think it will be a big piece to being competent once Anthony Davis returns, because Davis can't carry the team on his back like LeBron can a little bit more, just because he controls the tempo of the game. But I don't think Davis is the same caliber of a player as LeBron, for one, and he doesn't control the game and he doesn't communicate with his teammates as well, so he does need a better supporting cast, and Drummond will be a key part of that moving forward.
Yeah, I see Drummond as like a 18 to 20 minutes guy for the Lakers in the playoffs. Like yeah, what you said, plays that Dwight Howard role. It's hard to say if he's going to start or come off the bench as the second unit, because you don't have Jamil McGee to start. I don't think Marc Gasol is going to start. I don't even know if he's going to play a lot in the playoffs. So I think the problem for the Lakers now, when you get into the playoffs, like, who would you start at the 5? Because you can start Harrell, but he's usually a bench player. You could start Drummond, but then you won't have that Dwight Howard guy coming off the bench. I don't know if you want to start Gasol at all. Like Kuzma at the 4, I don't know, bump AD to the 5. Like, what are your thoughts about how their rotation is going to be in the playoffs?
Well, I think Drummond will start at the 5 in the playoffs, like, without question. Because, like I said, the Lakers their championship was built on size, and they are not going to be nearly as effective in the playoffs defensively if Kuzma is at the 4, because Kuzma is probably a minus defender still. So when you are playing in the playoffs and you're playing without Rajon Rondo, which I think is a huge loss this year, you'll really need to embrace the identity of playing with a lot of size. And yeah, sure, Harrell brings some intangibles to the team. He can score effectively, kind of. I mean, he's more of just a putback guy. He doesn't really have an offensive, like, back to the basket game, but he does bring a lot of energy and athleticism. That doesn't really cut it in the playoffs, though, because there are so many guys who are experienced in the post position. Like, even a guy like Rudy Gobert would eat him up offensively. And Rudy Gobert is not a talented offensive player by any stretch of the imagination, but you do have guys like Jokic in the West who's going to continue to back down. And if you have Harrell guarding Jokic all game, that's just, it's free points for them every time they go into the paint. So if you have a bigger body like Drummond, that gives you a fighting chance. And when you're in the playoffs, it's hard to pick and choose guys for each series if they're going to be starting, because you really want them to build up momentum. So I say you play through that offensive identity of being big and getting the ball down low. AD has gotten better at shooting the mid-range and the 3 throughout his career. So I think him and Drummond actually fit pretty well together.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Now when I think about it, like, the teams in the West, like the centers that they have on each team, like, yeah, you need Drummond to really guard those guys and really kind of be that force in the paint with, like, Jokic and Gobert and all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, even like a Kristaps Porzingis, like, there's no way Montrezl is going to do anything against him. I guess Yusuf Nurkic, if he's healthy, or Cantor, there's really nothing Montrezl can do to slow those guys down either. Yeah. Whereas Drummond gives you that tool where you could maybe lock down a Cantor or lock down a Nurkic, or at least bother Porzingis throughout a series.
Yeah. But now we're heading to the last stretch of the season. I think it's about a month and a half to the playoffs. And when you look at the standings, like the playoff seeding, I think 1 through 6 is pretty much going to stay the way it is. But the ordering may be different. You do have the Mavs creeping up a little bit. But when you see this Lakers team, they're probably not going to get AD and LeBron back 100% healthy, like probably not till the end of the regular season. And you still need time to gel with the new players, with Drummond and all that. So where do you see this team kind of finishing in the West, and what's their most their favorable matchup in the first round for them?
I would say they don't really have a matchup that's not favorable, just because, I mean, they're not scared of Denver, not really. They might be scared of the Clippers. That would be the only team who they probably don't want to play. So I believe they'll probably be in the 4 or the 5 seed. We'll see how long AD's out still. It's going to be up in the air, and until AD comes back, they're probably a win 3, lose 7 type of team for the next while. Maybe I think they have an easier stretch coming up, but maybe 5-5 through those times. There's no way they play over 500 basketball for the next while, though. So really, it's about avoiding the Clippers, and I don't see any other matchups that they'd be really bothered by in a first round series.
Yeah, for sure. But for NBA fans, I think the most fun outcome of the standings is that the Lakers finish the 6th seed, the Clippers stay the 3rd seed, and they play each other in the first round, which gives you a Denver-Portland 4-5 matchup, which is a callback to the 2019 season when one game went to 4 OTs and Portland won in 7 games. So I think those two matchups would be so fun to watch. And then you have the Suns and the Jazz, the 1-2. I think the 1 seed in the Western Conference is going to be so coveted, just because if you're the 2 seed, you're probably going to play the Mavs, and no one wants to play Luka in the playoffs. Compared to like the play-in winner, which is either Memphis, San Antonio, Golden State, who's spiraling down, and New Orleans, right? So I think, yeah, even it'll be interesting to see the 1 and 2 race, the race for the top seed in the West, because I think you'd want that 1 seed to move like far into the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll be a case, like, even you look at the Warriors, and they're the Warriors, but Steph Curry just can't be the greatest player in the world for 7 games in a 7-game series, and they're going to be tailoring their defense so that they can deny him the basketball. And unfortunately, I'd love to say that the Warriors are a real threat to the 1 seed this year, but they're not. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with what you said there.
I think his tailbone injury kind of does it for the Warriors this season, because that's probably a lingering injury, like when you think about it, like the tailbone injury. But yeah, that probably derails your season right there. But yeah, moving on. Our last topic: LaMarcus Aldridge to the Nets. Another washed-up All-Star onto the Nets, adding to the endless list of 2014-2015 NBA stars and Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and all those guys. So I don't really know if Aldridge gives a lot to the Nets. He obviously gives an option for where he does stretch the floor a little bit more so than Jordan and Claxton. But when you look at the rotation of the Nets, like I think I'd rather rely on Nick Claxton to hold down your defense in the paint over Aldridge and possibly Jordan. I don't know about Jordan, but yeah, like when you look at this team, like how much of a difference would Aldridge make to this team?
It's one of those occasions where, yeah, you're definitely getting more offense. Like, LaMarcus Aldridge is not in a minus on offense for this team at all. He brings a lot, but how much offense do you need if you're the Nets? Once KD comes back, especially, like, there's not enough ball to go around. And it seems a little bit like patchwork, where you have been looking for some kind of defensive presence in the post area, because that's clearly the weakness that people are going to attack, and you're likely going to have to play Giannis and Embiid throughout the playoffs at some point. So they came up with the idea of getting Aldridge, but it didn't really solve any of their problems. I like him as a player. I think he made the wrong choice of where to go to, just because he's not really a necessity for the team. And
well, he just wants a ring.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, he could be benched throughout the playoffs with a given matchup, or how the team's kind of exploiting that interior defense of the Nets. I like him. I like him as a player. He's a bit past his prime, but he still brings some good things to a team. But I just don't like Blake Griffin and LaMarcus Aldridge are a less important addition collectively than Andre Drummond to the Lakers, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And even when you head into the playoffs, like the game just slows down completely, and it all comes down to one-on-one ISO situations. You play way less team basketball, especially when you're the Nets, when you don't even play team basketball at all, like hardly, right? And when you have Irving, Harden, and Durant, like you're already set offensively, come playoff basketball, where, like I said, everything's ISO ball. So I think, really, I don't really think Aldridge, he could space the floor, but then again, you can just put Jeff Green or Bruce Brown in for him, and they're probably way more effective than him offensively and defensively, because they shoot the three better than him. And that's probably what the Nets need is that guy, like those two guys, to stay in the corner, and just receive those kickouts from any one of your big three guys. So yeah, I don't really think Aldridge is too big of an impact for the playoffs. But it'll be interesting to see how they use them, him and Griffin, because I think Griffin is really interesting because sure, he's a washed up player, but I wonder if you can really play him like in 2-minute, 3-minute spurts where you just need him to like just go all out, blow out his knees, and just sit on the bench for the rest of the game kind of thing. Because that can work, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they move forward with a couple of aging all-stars or past all-stars. It all relies on Kevin Durant. They were talking about it on First Take earlier this week, and they're just saying how Harden and Kyrie together don't win you a championship, and I totally believe that's true, just because of the matchups you have in the East with Embiid and Simmons and Drew Holiday and Giannis. But KD and Harden win you a championship. KD and Kyrie get you to the finals. And it's all going to be about how healthy KD is going into the playoffs. None of these additions are going to matter if KD isn't back and healthy.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see a small parallel between the Nets and the Lakers, where their stars are injured right now, and you got a month and a half into the playoffs. And so it's really leading up to that, to see where are these guys going to be back in time for them to get back in shape to regain their chemistry, because I don't think KD, Kyrie, and Harden have played more than 10 games together. I think it was like 7 or 8 together. But I think, but I don't even know if that's too much to worry about if you're the Nets. But even then, like, the playoffs are coming soon. It's going to come sooner than most people would expect. And given these guys' injuries right now, it'll be very interesting to see if any of their injuries come back in the playoffs, or are they just going to shake it off and just be who they are. But yeah, that's going to be a very interesting storyline for me to watch this season.
Yeah, it'll definitely come down to who's peaking at the right time and whose players are healthy. You should still expect a Lakers-Nets finals, but that's really up in the air at this point, just because there are so many legitimate threats in each conference. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that basically does it for this edition of the pod. I'm just glad we got some really good basketball games in the last couple of days of March Madness. Those are really enjoyable to watch. Even the playoff race in the NBA is going to be very, very tight, especially in the Eastern Conference, where from 4 through 12, it's just such a tight race, and teams are going to fall off. The Hornets going to fall off. The Hawks may, the Knicks may, but we'll see. But yeah, we're just all going to get ready and buckle up for the last month of the season. So yeah, until next time, we'll see you in the next edition of the pod.